Every single year, every NFL team has to take their 90-man roster down to 53 players. So in today's video, I want to talk about 5 NFL players who were notably cut. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about 5 NFL players who were notably cut by their respective team. Before we actually hop into the video, I do want to hand out 3 honorable mentions. Those 3 honorable mentions are going to be Frank Gore Jr., Paris Campbell, and Carl Lawson. Paris Campbell and Carl Lawson are 2 veteran players who have been around the league for a couple years. Both were brought into the Cowboys and the Eagles respectfully, and were both thought to be kind of key contributors for that team in the upcoming year. But unfortunately, some other things popped up, such as the Jahan Dotson trade, and such as the Dallas Cowboys not having enough time with Carl Lawson. And as it goes for Frank Gore Jr., this is a guy who is the son of one of the best running backs of all time. He's a pretty notable player. I thought he had a pretty good preseason, but he'll probably make somebody's practice squad. However, with that being said, if you do go on to enjoy today's video, hit the like and subscribe button, but let's hop into the video. Alright, so at number 5, we'll be discussing Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney has only been in the league for 4 years, and through his 4 years in the NFL, he has received 760 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns, which might not sound like a notable player, and if that's the case, then I understand, but we're talking about a guy who was taken in the first round just 3 years ago. In case you guys are unaware, he was taken by the New York Giants back in 2021. He was the 20th overall pick. He was a player that a lot of people didn't think was a first round pick or deserving of a first round pick, but regardless, he still was taken in the first round, and there is a lot of things we could talk about as to why this ended up happening. Whether it was off the field issues with him just being sometimes a bit of an idiot, or it was the on the field drop problems with the Kansas City Chiefs. This was something that kind of has been brewing up the past couple years, but it just hasn't happened. This is a guy who actually has a lot of potential. His overall speed is just something that is kind of an unteachable thing. He is an absolute freak athlete, but unfortunately, he's very similar to like the John Rosses of the world, where he may be extremely fast and athletic, which potentially could work in the college football game, but when it comes to the NFL, you gotta have more than just being able to be a fast player. Now, at the time, I actually understood the pick for the New York Giants. They needed a speedy receiver to add alongside guys like Sterling Shepard and some of the other players they had, but this one was a bit of a crazy pick. 20th overall for a guy who we knew had off the field issues and was never really seriously taken as like a first round guy. Regardless, the Giants did it. It just has not worked out for his career thus far. Last year with the Chiefs, he was basically a laughingstock around the entire NFL because he just could not stop dropping the football, even when he was wide freaking open. And the truth of the matter is, if he was unable to be successful with Patrick Mahomes and this Kansas City Chiefs team, I just really don't know what team is going to be able to fix him and make him a playable player in their team. So unfortunately for a guy like Kadarius Toney, I kind of think this could potentially be one of his last stops before he becomes like a legitimate just practice squad type player. Next up at number 4, let's talk about Donovan Peoples-Jones of the Detroit Lions. Now, through his career, he has a total of 122 receptions, 1,895 receiving yards, and 8 total touchdowns. And while this name may not seem like somebody who would be brought up in a video like this is a guy who was uber productive for the first 3 years of his career with the Cleveland Browns before he was ultimately traded between the Browns and the Detroit Lions. And unfortunately, with the Detroit Lions, he just never was really able to do much of anything. In the 8 games he played with the Detroit Lions, he only received 7 targets for 58 yards, which obviously that's just not going to be somebody who you're going to think is going to be uber productive, but he just wasn't really productive for that team, which is extremely unfortunate because in 2022 with the Cleveland Browns as like their second/third option, he had 839 yards on 61 receptions. So we're talking about somebody who never was like a true receiver 1, but easily could have filled in a nice spot as like a receiver 3 or 4. But with this Detroit Lions team putting a lot more pressure on guys like Jameson Williams to step up into their roles, a guy like Donovan Peoples-Jones just hasn't really had a spot for that team. And it's kind of sad. I actually think he would be better off staying with Cleveland because Cleveland, while they have some receivers, they could easily use a guy like Donovan Peoples-Jones, whereas the team like Detroit Lions has so many different options to go to that they just don't really need a guy like Donovan Peoples-Jones. This was a guy who I think by all accounts has had a successful NFL career, at least up to this point. He was taken back in 2020 as a 6th round pick. So anytime you're a 6th round pick in 2020 and you've been able to make it this far through your career and you've been able to have some pretty successful seasons by all accounts, I would say it's been a pretty successful career for Donovan Peoples-Jones, but ultimately speaking, this year it just kind of caught up to him. He just did not have a productive year last year, but I do think this is a guy who could easily make another team's 53-man roster, a team that could potentially use a wide receiver 3/4. I think Donovan Peoples-Jones still has a lot of capabilities, but unfortunately, it just did not work out with the Detroit Lions. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3. At number 3, we have Caleb Farley of the Tennessee Titans. Unfortunately for Caleb Farley, he just has really never been able to, 1, stay healthy, but 2, play at a high level for this Titans team. Obviously, we know the injuries that he's been dealing with. This was a guy who was taken in the first round in 2021, had a bunch of injuries in his rookie year, and just has never really been able to find the consistency on the football field, whether it's injuries, performance, just all these sort of things that have been unfortunate breaks for this guy. It's kind of caught up to him at this point, and he's been cut by the Tennessee Titans this year. And you want to talk about a guy who just cannot catch a break. This is a dude who did not play a single game in 2023. His house, I'm not sure if it was his house or his father's house, but his house exploded, which unfortunately killed his father, which, by the way, is extremely sad. Rest in peace. That's an extremely sad turn of events for him. But this is a guy who just has not been able to catch a break. Injuries, house explosions, off the field issues, just the whole account that honestly, it might actually be a good thing that he got cut by the Tennessee Titans. He might be somebody who needs to go to a different team, get a fresh, brand new start, go play 100 miles away from where you used to play in Tennessee. This is a guy who was uber talented coming out of Virginia Tech. He had a lot of capabilities. It just wasn't ever really working out for Tennessee. And honestly, I think this was the right move for both Tennessee and I think for Caleb Farley. If I was Farley, I would want to get as far away as I physically can from Tennessee. And to be honest with you, this might be a case where Caleb Farley might be actually happy that he got cut. I'm not going to speak for him. I could be completely wrong. But if I was in his situation, I don't think I would be all that upset about being dropped by the team. Yes, it's a little bit scary being a free agent and not being sure where you're going to go, but I would personally imagine that Caleb Farley is going to get more opportunities as a practice squad player for a lot of different teams in the league. And if he can go out there and perform well during practices and potentially some preseason games moving forward, he might be able to get back on some 53-man rosters. Again, he has the talent, the potential. It just never worked out in Tennessee, and I really do hope that the injuries and the off-the-field stuff hasn't gotten too hard for him to deal with, and that way he could potentially become a starter, or at least, you know, a guy who's on a 53-man roster for the rest of his career, because I hate to see it go down this way. But next up at number 2, let's talk about Bailey Zappe of what was once the New England Patriots. Bailey Zappe, by all accounts, has been, I would say, a pretty successful 4th-round pick for the New England Patriots. Again, he was taken back in 2022 as somebody who was thought of to be the backup and potential predecessor for Mac Jones. And at times, it has actually looked somewhat pretty for Bailey Zappe. I could think of a couple games where he went out there and actually played quite well. But unfortunately, this was a team that decided to head in a different direction, which was the right move for the team. They brought in Drake May. They brought in Joe Milton. They brought in a veteran quarterback to teach both those guys. And for this team, it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to bring in 4 quarterbacks into the 53-man roster. So unfortunately for Bailey Zappe, he did get cut, but as of when I'm making this video, I do believe that he has been picked up by the Chiefs. Don't quote me on that. I think I read that though. And if that's the case, it's not a bad place for him to go, all things considered. The Chiefs don't really have like a true backup, at least off the top of my head, that is better than Bailey Zappe. So while Zappe might be on their practice squad, I could definitely see where he could potentially be the backup or 3rd string. Actually, they have Carson Wentz, so maybe not, but he could definitely be in consideration for it. Through his short 2-year career, he has a completion percentage of 63.2 for 2,053 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. And this is only in a 14 games span of him playing games. These are not including all the times where he came in late or played the entirety of the game. So that's just his general stats, which I think is pretty darn impressive for a guy who's like a 3rd string quarterback who's going to get some playing time. So for a team like the Chiefs, they did pick him up, which I think they did. I think this is going to be an awesome pickup for this team because he can be your 3rd string quarterback behind Carson Wentz and behind Patrick Mahomes. And if worst case scenario, there is an injury and let's say Carson Wentz doesn't play that good, Bailey Zappe is a proven player who has been successful thus far in his career with a team that is far worse than the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think for that team, it was a good pickup. And for Bailey Zappe, I could think of a worse spot for him to go to. Obviously, he won't be starting anytime soon with that team, but hey, at least you have a job, you're going to still get paid, and you actually do have a chance to potentially see the field if some injuries do occur. But at number 1, let's discuss Tim Patrick of what was once the Denver Broncos. Now, this one is a bit of an unfortunate tale because in the first 2 years of his career, you saw a lot of promise, but never a whole lot of production until 2020 and until 2021, where he had 2 very productive seasons as the Denver Broncos receiver 2/3. In both years, he had over 50 receptions and over 700 receiving yards, gaining over 5 and 6 touchdowns in those respective seasons. But unfortunately, the past 2 years, he has just been unable to stay healthy, and now it doesn't really look like he has much of a future with this Denver Broncos team. Now, this one does make a lot of sense because Denver does have some younger players that they do want to give some opportunities to, such as a guy like a Troy Franklin, who's more than likely going to try to get some receptions and some playing time this upcoming season, whereas somebody like Tim Patrick, who's a bit older, he's 30 years of age, hasn't been productive the past couple years due to injuries, so I kind of understand it. Now, this is a guy who will most definitely find a new team to be able to play with, whether it's a team like potentially Detroit, who just got rid of Donovan Peoples-Jones. Maybe they could get a guy like a Tim Patrick, who I still think can be uber productive and still be a quality player in this league. I think Tim Patrick still has a lot of potential. It just really sucks that injuries derailed his career, especially when he was just starting to accelerate his career into becoming somewhat of a decent receiver 2/3. Again, in 2021 and 2020, he had over 700 yards, and this is with quarterbacks like Teddy Bridgewater throwing him the ball. So you could imagine, had he been able to stay healthy and you put him on a team that maybe has a competent quarterback, we're talking about a guy who easily could have been a solid receiver 2 or 3 had he stayed healthy. But unfortunately, injuries caught up to him, age is starting to catch up to him, and now I really do wonder what the future of Tim Patrick is going to look like. But of course, if you guys agree or disagree with my list, you can let me know in the comment section below. And if you went on to enjoy the video, again, hit the like and subscribe button because that helps me out a ton. But I love you guys. Peace.